The Indian aviation sector is going through an extremely exciting as well as unpredictable phase. It's a time of rejuvenation for an airline like Jet Airways. A new entrant, Akasa, is getting ready to make its debut. On the other hand, you have a geopolitical situation which is making the entire industry globally very, very nervous. You have ATF at all-time highs, and this is going to impact costs. Recovery in terms of consumer demand for flights is still not reaching COVID levels or pre-COVID levels. So what is the situation looking like for the Indian aviation sector right now? To join us on this deep dive, I'm speaking today with Abhishek Banerjee. He is practice lead consulting and advisory at CAPA India. Jitendra Bhargava, former ED of Air India, is with us on the show. Ajay Awtaney, founder livefromalounge.com, is also joining us on the show. We talked about some of the factors that are influencing the aviation industry, and we talked about the geopolitical tensions, high crude prices, Jet Airways, Akasa. But let's not forget the new rebranding of Air India after the Tatas have taken over. What difference will that make to the industry as a whole? We also have exciting news that international flights will resume towards the end of the month of March. So putting all of that in context, let me start with Abhishek Banerjee's view. Abhishek, do you think that this is going to be an inflection point for the aviation industry in India specifically, or do prices of crude outweigh everything else I've just mentioned?
Thank you for the opportunity, first of all. You have rightly put, this is a really exciting time for aviation back again, with the news just in that we are going to resume international services at the end of the month. Having said that, the situation is not as it used to be pre-COVID. Firstly, COVID is still there very much, just keeps coming back. Just saw one such wave which we are coming out of. But even before we could recuperate from that, we have a very difficult geopolitical situation, which first of all has led to a massive increase in the oil prices globally. A lot of uncertainty. We have already hit around 140 a barrel. This is not likely to end soon for the next foreseeable couple of months. So with that, we all know that aviation in India is a tough industry to be in. 40% of our overall operating costs account for just aviation turbine fuel. So that's one major factor. In addition to that, exchange rates are hovering around 77, is just on the rise. That poses another challenge. Apart from that, we are also expecting increase in airport charges. All the last couple of years, we have not seen much, but here, given all the other pressures, that is something which is also going to increase to the cost base of airlines. So in this situation, while we are seeing a couple of new entrants, exciting news about Akasa, of course, coming on board with a very strong backing, and Jet 2.0, we all were really very welcome in terms of getting Jet 2.0, and we hopefully will see that back into operations in the next few months. But with all this, the competition is also going to rise. It's not going to reduce. So overall, it's a very volatile situation, a very challenging situation, and yet exciting as we see the international gates being opened up. We are going to see the foreign carriers back in action, end of the air bubbles. So with all that, keeping our fingers crossed, but yes, it's going to be an exciting time. Maybe this is going to be a new era for aviation as we get on to post-COVID. Something which we were all in early 2000s when the new LCC model came into the picture, but now it's going to be a very different yet a very exciting period.
So Since I think the early 2000s and the rise of the LCCs being the last big reference point that Abhishek has talked about, let's look at the last decade or so. It has been a tough spot. Even before COVID-19, aviation sector was really struggling to turn profitable with one or two notable exceptions. Jitendra Bhargava, let me come to you specifically on the point of Air India and what we can expect next. I mean, the disinvestment of Air India and Air India finally passing on to private hands, that too the Tata Group, has, I would say, easily been one of the most exciting turning points for an airline in Indian aviation. But now what next? The combined market share of these three airlines in which the Tata Group has a stake, Air India, Vistara, Air Asia, is about 24-25%, and not really a hefty entity right now. What do you think is going to be the path ahead for them? How do they consolidate?
One positive thing that will emerge out of the acquisition of Air India by Tata's is that they will be able to enhance aircraft utilization, therefore add capacity, number of seats into the Indian market. That will be the one big takeaway. The second, of course, is that the international market will be dominated by Air India and much more vigorously in future. As it is, none of the Indian carriers operate, barring Vistara, to a few international destinations, to United States, and of course, they'll be able to add capacity. And once they add capacity to be in competition, now that the government of India has allowed the aircraft operation and international sectors as per bilateral rights, you will have competition and Tata's will have improved product and all those things will take place. So it's a very healthy thing that's coming in. But one point that I would like to put across is that India is a price-sensitive market. ATF prices are high on one side. The second thing that is going to happen is the moment the fares go up, the Indian market will contract. And this contraction that will pose a big, big difference to the fortunes of the new airlines, whether it's Revival Jet Airways, Revive Airline, or we are talking of Akasa Airline. The normal thing is that when a new airline makes an entry into the market, they come up with promotional fares. Now, where is the scope for these promotional fares when the existing airlines are finding it exceedingly difficult to survive with the ATF prices going up and price and the fares, you cannot really go and increase fares up beyond a certain point because even Indigo, for example, is adding capacity. So the moment the fares go up, the market contracts, the load factors register a fall, so you cannot really be on an expansion thing. But international, I would quite agree with you that the geopolitical thing, Ukraine war, etc., but it is not going to be affecting Air India because you have the Soviet airspace, the Russian airspace available to Air India. So there's a plus point there. It's all a question of Tata's putting the act together fast and ensuring that the number of flights being operated to United States go up significantly. And as I've often said, you have the pilots, you have the cabin crew underutilized. So without adding any cost, any additional manpower, they will be able to jack up the flight to United States, and that will be a money spinner for them.
I want to focus a bit on new choices for the Indian consumer or the Indian passenger once again. Jet, Akasa, and a rebranded, renewed Air India, now with their fresh offering and fresh look. What does that mean for the Indian passenger?
Hi, Tamanna. So I think, there are two things that are going to happen over the course of this year. The first, like you mentioned, that Jet Airways is coming back and Akasa is definitely coming back, taking to the skies as of this year. So that will add new products to the Indian market. Now, there are two things that will happen. One is that the stimulation, so all these, like Mr. Bhargava was saying, airlines used to traditionally cut prices and do promotional fares to attract audience. Remember, Jet Airways already has a brand loyalty like nothing else, okay? And I think I talk to tons of people who are like, hey, when will Jet Airways be back? So I think that will play to the benefit whenever they're back because people would like to try out the new Jet Airways again. and then decide if they want to do business with them or not. Akasa is promising a whole new different product. We don't have much news about it at this point of time, but it's some sort of a hybrid model, I believe, between an LCC and a full service carrier. We'll see what that comes out. And if that comes out great, obviously people will want to try them out as well. The other thing, Air India, I think Air India domestically already does fantastically, but Air India needs a whole host of leadership at the top. There is a leadership vacuum at this point of time. With the Turkish gentleman backing out, I think the Tata Group will not make any strategic moves on Air India till they don't have a captain of the ship. And it's not just one captain they need. They need a whole cricket team at the top, right? They need a chief commercial officer, they need a CEO, they need a chief marketing officer, they need a whole bunch of people at the chief positions who will, run all sorts of departments in the airline. And that's the typical setup in any airline, small or big. So I imagine the Tata Group turnaround needs to really wait for these appointments to happen, and then the Tata Group turnaround will happen. In the meanwhile, these two newcomers in the market, what they will be doing, they can also stimulate the market by, attracting travel agents to sell their tickets and get people on their planes. Okay, and that's the second thing that will happen from their end. If they can't raise prices, they can always give more commissions to travel agents to book people on, an Akasa aircraft or on a Jet Airways 2.0. So that, I believe, will get more people to sample the product. And after that, obviously, people form their opinions, and then they like an airline or not like an airline. So we will see from there how this will go forward. But that's all, I think, exciting times for the domestic proposition.
Even as there are exciting times for the domestic proposition, there are also big challenges ahead. We talked about them briefly earlier, but Abhishek, I'd like to return to them. There's an ICRA report which says that in the next 2 years, the aviation industry may face losses as high as 42,000 crore rupees. Now, we're of course in the middle of a very uncertain situation geopolitically. We don't know what's going to happen with, fuel prices, and you explained how 40% of the cost for airlines is fuel prices. What other fallout do airline companies need to look out for? And I want to allude to the example of what's happened in Russia, where their civil flights, their domestic flights for civilians are provided by companies who've pulled the plug because of sanctions, and they find themselves adrift right now. Is that a lesson for nations and for the aviation industry?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. So, when we look at the airlines operating their fleets, you'll see that most of the case, over a period of time, the industry has moved from more of owned aircrafts to leased aircrafts. And that's a very important factor here. We have seen, just not from the Russian context, but also from an Indian context earlier, when partly when Kingfisher Airlines demise happened, there was a challenge about lessors taking lease aircrafts out of the country. So number one, while regulations are being looked at, the Indian government is really proactively looking at, making regulations conducive to lessors to increase the confidence on airlines in the unfortunate case of such instances. So that plays an important role given the industry now. You'll see that all these startup airlines will not have their own assets. They will typically go for lease aircrafts. So that's number one. So regulations do play an important role. Number two, airlines have to ensure that their capitalization is taken care of. So when Jet 2.0, we are talking about coming into picture, that's one of their biggest things that they have to look at, that they're well capitalized. So that's something which not just Jet, but every airline has to ensure that they're well capitalized, they have a strong governance, they ensure that they are creditworthy in terms of respecting their lease outgoes as everything on the financial side. So that's probably one area that airlines have to be really careful about. And given all the cost pressures that we are talking about, definitely this poses one of the challenges and risks, rather, we should say, for the long-term sustainability of airlines in India right now.
Talking about the viability and sustainability of airlines right now. So two factors which I would say are serious headwinds. One, of course, is something that no one has any control about, which is where crude prices are going, geopolitical tensions, etc. The other is the slower pace of revival of demand, where your passenger load factors are still not back to pre-COVID levels. How can airlines strategize for this?
Manna, one thing that we have been overlooking of late is the sharp drop or the depreciation of Indian rupee vis-a-vis dollar. Most airline costs are dollar denominated. So this is going to have a huge bearing on the financial viability of the airlines. That, of course, we cannot overlook. But the fact remains that the airline will have to act with maturity. You can't be chasing passengers at the cost of profitability. It's going to be disastrous. With costs high, you will say, okay, I'm going to be offering these kind of fares on these sectors just to lure passengers to fill up the seats. And eventually find that you're not breaking even. I've often said, you can't be selling seat below the cost of producing a seat. Let there be some kind of maturity. But what we are going to witness, as I said earlier, the moment the fares go up, the market will contract. On the other side, the capacity addition is taking place. How do you fill up the aircraft? So this is a consequence of the cost, low occupancy factor that we're going to witness in the next few months. And then you have losses being announced by all the airlines every quarter. Now, this is something which is a repeat of what we have seen in the past. The only tragic part is that the airlines have not learned their lesson. Now, one can always say we are welcoming Jet's revival, we are welcoming the coming of Akasa airline, all right. But this was at a time when the market would have been growing. Now, if the Indian market can sustain a growth, of course, there's no denying the fact once the international operation starts, Indians will start coming in, fly within the country as well, contributing to increased number of passengers on the domestic sector. But the market is tough, even in normal times, and we are now in abnormal times. You have the number of seats available or the capacity augmentation that's going to take place, possible contraction on the occupancy factor on aircraft, high cost for the airlines. It's going to be tough. And both oil prices, ATF prices, as well as rupee depreciation is something which is beyond the airline's control. So how is a finance officer of an airline going to work out and say, look, I'm going to be sustaining this period with the minimal loss that I can incur, the airline can incur and survive. I see you had started the program by saying we are going through exciting times in aviation. In my opinion, we're going through a very turbulent, we're going to be going through a very, very turbulent period in the coming months. I wish to be optimistic, but I just can't be optimistic.
No, I mean, you have to look at what we are facing squarely, and it's not looking like good news at all. Ajay, I just want your take on the same question. What do you think airlines will have to do to survive? Even though international flights are starting again, will the focus be on somehow growing revenues from the domestic market? And aren't there ceilings and limitations to this?
So I think Tamanna, Abhishek and Jitendra sir already answered the question partly, but I beg to differ a bit. Number one, obviously everyone has to maintain discipline on paying out the leases and everything, like we've seen, with SpiceJet, I believe they've had trouble servicing the leases. I think also Go First has had trouble servicing the leases during the COVID period, and then some aircraft have gone back. But I don't think that airlines are as irresponsible as Mr. Bhargava is making them out to be. Unfortunately, under government regulation, the airlines have had to keep a certain, floor and a cap on their prices over the past, I believe, over a year now. And let's not forget that the T-15 cap is still not gone. So I think people are paying reasonably okay prices at this point of time. And, that should be some sort of balancing the blow that will come out from, the raised prices. If airlines can operate at a higher fare level and still do business, we saw the business during Diwali when planes were full. I got off a plane just 2 days back, and aircraft. I think all the major hubs are back to full planes again, and I believe by Holi we should already see this coming up to hopefully 90%, if not 100%, of prior levels. So I think that if airlines, all of them, acted responsibly, they can make money in this market as well. They don't have to undercut each other. They can still price responsibly and still fill up their planes.
Yep. It's going to be a tough ride, and the resilience of domestic growth, which will really be linked completely to how the economy revives, is going to be the key. Just one last quick question, Ajay. Are we going to see these really scary levels of crude spikes getting passed on to tickets sooner than later?
I would imagine if the government regulation goes away, there is no way to escape this. So I hope that these are actually passed on to customers. There are two levels to this, right? The first level is the adjustment of the ATF price domestically in the first place. I don't know if that will be done in tandem with how the prices are escalating globally, or if it will be done in a more softer manner in India, number one. And number two, then when the ATF prices go up, the airlines have to take a call if they want to kind of, raise fares or not. What we're already seeing is that fares are going up. T plus 15 fares are also going up by maybe 10-15% already. But yeah, I imagine they can do more there. And let's not forget, once these guys will start flying abroad fully, for a lot of airlines also use their Middle East trips or their trips to Singapore and other places to fill up their tanks and bring them back. So there is a hybrid, allocation of domestic refueling and international refueling. So a certain amount of the fuel uplift happens abroad as well, and that should also help them kind of keep the costs a bit under control, if not fully.
Well, there's a limit to how much of that cost can be borne by airlines who are anyway struggling right now. But thank you so much to all of you for joining us today on the show and giving us this perspective on the Indian aviation sector.